Richard Bruce here with another update on my COVID-19 case, which, as I mentioned before, I started getting my first symptoms of a slight sore throat March 10th, and then 10 days later, around March 20th, is when I knew I had it, because all of a sudden I started getting this pain in my lungs and a shortness of breath. Also with a growing sense of the flu symptoms, which were also a very achy body. And so for about 5 days, I had like a severe flu in which it progressed up to about the 23rd was my worst day. And it was pretty intense, and I was pretty worried about it, frankly. And it was a pain in my lungs it started in my, I felt it more in my right lung, and then I felt it then again, it started to grow into my left lung, and I was concerned about losing my breathing. And I was quite concerned because of all that we're seeing on the news. You know, they're running out of respirators, and the body bags are piling up, and there was reason to be worried about it. And in any case, but after about 5 days, it subsided. So, well, around the 26th, I had my first day of actually feeling like a human being. And then by the 27th, I was pretty much clear of it, except for a residual, which I still have now. It's the 28th of April, all that time later. A still slight, like a inability to breathe, and it just like a light though feeling of it, not like a, you know, it's like running around on a smoggy day, if you've ever experienced that, just like a slight, like a little bit at the end of the breath. So it's been decreasing steadily, and so I was concerned that it might like linger around for a long time, and I think it will. Like I think for even like, you know, 2 or 3 months even, but at the current progression, if it continues, I think I'll be completely over it. And I did not suffer a relapse. However, I understand that people do get a reoccurrence. I've talked with several people now who have had a reoccurrence of it, so they get the symptoms again, and then they get better, and then they get them again. But that didn't happen to me, also because I was following very hygienic standards. So I just want to talk about some of the elements that are probably the most important that we're facing with this, or that have stood out for me. And that is that we get a lot of people, especially in the conspiracy-minded group, people that, you know, are interested in the stuff like I'm interested in, the reptilians, the Illuminati, all this stuff, the conspiracy crowd, okay? And but because people are aware of how much they're lying to us, how much there's, you know, the problem with, you know, the cell phone stuff, the 5G and all this. And there's a lot of people that are protesting the lockdown, saying that it's all just fake and the numbers are fake and this is no big deal. And actually, as I have maintained from the beginning, this is quite serious because I have experienced it personally myself. So I know that it is real, and I know that it is serious, and that also you could say that the lockdown measures are a control mechanism trying to get us all under control and all this nefarious stuff that I know they're up to because they're all Satanists. But on top of that, there is the reality that they had to do this, and it is a reasonable measure, even if they are doing other evil stuff, and even if they are lying to us about a bunch of other stuff.
What's interesting in New York, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to find individuals that I personally know, or their family members, you know, ex-coworkers, friends, family, that are coming down with COVID-19 or passed away from it. All right, I just had a coworker just recently from Detroit that his cousin died from COVID-19. So we're starting to hear cases where, you know, it's hitting closer to home. It's not just this nebulous concept of, you know, people dying from COVID-19, but it's in our circle of friends, or in our circle of acquaintances.
And if you don't mind, let me just interject here. I just ran the math while you were talking. Even if 13.9% of New Yorkers are infected, and that's 2.7 million people, as you mentioned, with the aggregate number of deaths in New York so far, 20,792, that still means that this virus achieves a 0.77% 8% fatality rate, case fatality rate among those who are infected, including those who are asymptomatic. So it's still almost 800% more fatal than the regular flu, even if there are no false positives in those antibody tests. So this is not the, a lot of people out there trying to say, oh, this isn't dangerous, it's not killing anybody. Not at all. Even if these numbers are accurate, it's still way more dangerous than the flu.
It is very dangerous. It's very deadly. And not only that, I try to frame it in the context of wars. If you look at combat deaths from the Korean War, that was 33,000. If you look at the combat deaths in Vietnam, that was 47,000. We're right now at 47,000. And Vietnam was many years. And we've only had this for 2.5 months, roughly.
Right.
So we're already at the point of the Vietnam era in combat deaths. So that's kind of like how I'm trying to frame it. So the average person can understand the severity of this.
Yeah, and it's astonishing. I mean, we talked about this last week, and I won't dwell on it very much, but I thought that when we hit the number of deaths equal to the seasonal flu last year, which is about 34,000 something, and by the way, the coronavirus has killed more Americans in the last 17 days than the seasonal flu killed in an entire year. But when we got to that number, I thought that a lot of people who have been saying, oh, this is just the flu, that they would say, okay, it's not the flu. But instead, they just use a new adjective now. They say, oh, it's just a bad flu. So I guess as the number keeps rising to 60,000, they're going to say, oh, it's a horrible flu. They're just going to add another adjective.
Right. No, and what's sad is this, some of the, let's say, alternative news out there is kind of promoting this, adding the adjectives, and unfortunately, it's hurting the cause to try to show that our civil liberties are being eroded here. They're just saying, oh, it's just going to be a bad flu, and not to pay attention. You get out of shelter in place, there's reinfection. It gives the WHO and the CDC, a more ammo or more stance for forced vaccinations.
Absolutely.
People need to pay attention, really pay attention to this forced vaccination program.
So I just want to make that clear that we cannot determine, if we're going to be logical about this, that the lockdown itself is a control, method, or in and of itself, like some sort of evil locking everybody up for nothing. Because a lot of people who have not experienced this themselves or know someone who died from this do not take it as seriously. I have people that I like and that I care about making the really big mistake of saying things like it's no big deal, or there's no virus, or it's 5G. Now, that being said, I don't know. There is a possibility that it could be. See, I know I got something like what happens when a virus attacks you, but as I have maintained, it could be something else. We don't know, but I could say I would say my feeling about it is 90% certainty that it is in fact a virus, but it might be exacerbated by targeting. In other words, everybody could have breathed it in by now because they've chemtrailed the entire population, just about, except for people who maybe live in very remote areas, but sooner or later it'll filter down and you'll get it. I don't know if they've sprayed all over the planet, and then they're shooting people with the 5G or something. I'm not, that could possibly be, and that's why you're getting, it's a regular flu that they have aerosolized, and then they hit you with a directed energy weapon from satellites or cell phone towers or something else. Who knows? So instead of getting all out of joint about that, like, what is it, 5G? No, it's a virus. Arguing back and forth, because we tend to do that. I'm just going to try to focus on the facts of what I've seen, which is that it is a virus. And the more important information is that where did it come from? Oh, guess what? It turns out Fauci funded it for $3.7 million from the NIH, paying the Wuhan lab specifically and taking out patents on the coronavirus, paying the Wuhan lab specifically for bat coronavirus study. And notice, no one is talking about it. Of course, you're not going to see it on the mainstream media, which all of you fellow conspiracy folks know are lying to us, and don't even, and I recommend don't even watch it unless you're specifically looking to see the lies that they're telling us. But otherwise, it's like pure poison coming out of that TV. I got a message from the Lord to not even look at it, and I have not regretted it, because when I've looked back at it, it's just ugh. But now and again, watching it just to see the mainstream news, because sometimes they do include some facts, so I don't, but hold anybody at fault if they want to watch that occasionally just to kind of get some other facts about this. But just remember, we know that it's lies and so forth. So, but the other thing is that there's a lot of blame on China for this. And if we are going to be honest in the conversation, we have to include all the facts, which is that it looks like very possibly the research could have been initiated and funded and started here in America, and I am not a CCP supporter.
Whose bioweapon is it? Who does it belong to? Well, one thing that's changed over the last couple of weeks is this idea that it was an accident. This coronavirus was an accident. Now almost we have all these nations pointing the finger at each other. Tom Cotton, the Chinese ministry, all saying that each other developed a bioweapon. We have Bahrain saying Iran developed the bioweapon. But I just want to go over some of the people that say it's a bioweapon or an engineered virus. So once it's engineered, you can engineer it for good purposes, but you only need one Peter Strzok to make it a bioweapon. So really that's the same argument if it's engineered or a bioweapon. So let's take Luc Montagnier. He's the guy who discovered the HIV virus. Now, to me, that would be the perfect person to understand if there's a homology, if there's an analogous part of the HIV virus in this virus. I've said it's glycoprotein 120. Now there's a whole chorus of people now, a couple of weeks later, saying glycoprotein 120, they're showing Fauci's patents and so forth. The things we told you about 2 weeks ago, different folks now doing lawsuits against China. When not suing Roger Stone, they're suing China, saying that they have a key guy at the Pasteur Institute now says that it's a bioweapon, and lawsuits now being drawn up against China. We'll talk about the different people we've reached out to, in addition to obviously Francis Boyle, Dr. Francis Boyle, who prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic in the World Court, the world leading author of the biosafety program. He says it's a bioweapon. We've reached out to folks in the professional community who were there in Korea during the outbreak, that were a potential victim of the virus in Daegu, where we had this Korean cult, again, a neuroscientist working there, who's also reading the literature day in and day out. His conclusion, Dr. McCarran, his conclusion is it's a bioweapon attacking the porphyrin ring, as we've talked about so many times, knocking out the iron. We've talked about all the people, Dr. Cottrell, PhD, Paul Cottrell, PhD, finishing candidate in graduate degree in microbiology in Harvard. He's inhaling all this scientific literature. His conclusion, it's a bioweapon. Their doctor roundtable of all the learned scientists saying bioweapon. And we have the guy who runs EcoHealth, the guy who is in business with the person who leaves the door open at Fort Detrick. His name is Jens Kuhn, K-U-H-N. He only has run bioweapons programs. He takes over the Soviet Union's bioweapons program when the Soviet Union collapses. Let's just talk about the doctors that you already know about from a month ago. This Dr. Peng Zhou, Z-H-O-U, recruiting for postdocs that we're trying to weaponize with the bat virus. There's no doubt here with Dr. Peng Zhou, he works for the Bat Lady, which is this Zhengli. We see her bragging openly in front of scientific consortiums, in front of large audiences, talking about going out and finding bats 600 miles away from Wuhan, bringing them to the lab, transfecting and cross-fecting these different species. We know the HIV gets into the bat virus, into the coronavirus. We know that potentially there's other things other than glycoprotein 120 and glycoprotein 41 and the G protein. The non-structural proteins inside the cell are also very homologous, some 100% with the bat virus, something very unusual that's just not found in most virus homologies. So we have her talking about how it was weaponized. If you don't remember, if you want signs of a cover-up and you don't remember Dr. DeCarli, we talked about Dr. DeCarli a month ago, or a little bit more than a month ago. He was one of 2 epidemiologists in the University of Milan, where the hotspot was, where all the people were dying, saying, hey, these cases appeared at the end of October. They appeared at all through November, all through December. So why is everyone covering these things up? Even the Chinese government covered up these deaths. So what's really happening? Remember, these people are at these universities, make no bones about the fact that they had these couriers going back and forth to Harvard, going back and forth to Dr. Lieber, who was investigating in this nanotechnology. We have Dr. Bavari going into a nanotechnology company called ProTransit. We have all these couriers going back and forth, bio couriers that are either Seattle or NATO couriers. And again, the program's discontinued, so not following them anymore, and they're leaving Harvard back and forth with the CRISPR lab there, George Church's CRISPR lab. They're going back and forth from the BSL facility in Winnipeg. Again, these things are not bats flying to fish markets to then being eaten by pigs. These are human beings with test tubes, with courier status. Some are in Macho Benassi's case, the courier to the top supreme allied commander of NATO. You can't get any higher in terms of courier status. We have the Duke scientists at NUS. We have the scientists at NUS talking about genomics, placing this directly at the end of October. It's not genetic mutation, it was engineered. We have the University of Cambridge talking about how this is now doing their genomic analysis, saying it was not an accident, not an accident at all. We have the fact that there was, for almost the whole life of the virus, since the common cold, 58 years, no HIV ever appearing in coronavirus. All 6 strains that we know about, all of a sudden, as soon as we CRISPR the HIV virus, all of a sudden now we seem to be CRISPRing in these long strings of completely homologous strings into the DNA, variable section 1, 2, 3, and 4, just for the GP120 protein, not counting all the other proteins. We have the same envelope protein. We have the same high homology in the membrane protein, the high homology in the capsid protein. So it just seems to be like almost a Reese's peanut butter cup of HIV and coronavirus. The first case, November 18th. I don't know how much longer that the Chinese government or any government is going to keep this fallacy up that November 18th is the first case. I think that goes the way of Lee Harvey Fishmonger, and this being one fishmonger cutting a bat and feeding it to a pig on one day. No, the scientific study that the government of China produced said themselves that it was 25,000 piglets eating infected bats and also cross-infecting the pigs. What is the missing link? And I want to get to the missing link, and I want to put out a few things, but I just wanted to also repeat that this affects a new pathway, the STING pathway, which is the interferon pathway. Again, up until now, coronavirus, common cold virus, never affected this pathway that causes this cytokine storm that affecting this this STING pathway. Again, this is a pathology that comes from AIDS. It comes from AIDS, getting the body to attack itself, okay, in an autoimmune way.
Well, guys, we got April 28th, and I am standing here in the park getting a little bit of fresh earth energy because I'm always wearing my insulation, so I thought I would get a little bit of earth energy. And I'm in the park here across the way from where I live. So where I live, you might have seen when I walk out of my house, but I like over there. But yeah, so I was thinking about, and I'm gonna make a movie about this, but I was thinking about the lockdown because that's one of the main questions that people are having. And actually, although in one sense, I think that the protesting against the lockdown is not wise. On the other hand, it shows that people are willing to stand up and take a stand. But unfortunately, in this case, I think it's not quite the right stand because the pandemic situation is such that they, I should say, have a justified cause to do it. And in fact, really, if you were going to do it, you should do it for longer, like 6 months, which is not going to happen. But that brings me to my other point about it, which is that in reality, overall, as easy as it spreads, it doesn't make, it's not going to really keep everybody from getting it, is what I think. I think that with as easy as it clearly spreads, it's everywhere, and I think they may have even, as I said, aerosolized it, but let's say minus that, let's just say it's not that, but then if you calculate how quickly and easily it spreads, eventually you're going to come into contact with it. I mean, everybody would have to be isolated for like 2 years, really, in order for the virus lifespan to be so depleted that it couldn't crop back up again if the majority of people don't have antibodies to it. So that kind of, takes the air out of the whole isolation lockdown thing. But on the other hand, I can see why the authorities did it, because I mean there's obviously a very good reason. It's very and by the way, I'll get more into the numbers, but the people that are saying this is smaller than the flu, I'll continue to maintain it's not. Only really two months into this as far as America goes, and we already have more deaths than we had in combat deaths that we had in Vietnam. So, and furthermore, the flu in 2018 had less deaths in a year than we've had in basically the last 2-3 months. So people like Dr. Cottrell and Sean Atwood, and that are correct, that are saying that this is a serious, grave problem, that you shouldn't be saying it's a hoax or there's no virus or it's not that bad. It's much less than the flu, and the numbers they're telling. By the way, to count somebody who died from COVID-19 supposedly, but they had other complications, although that is kind of like saying it's almost like a third of the cause, it's still, I believe, for counting purposes, is correct to count that as a COVID-19 death. So people that are saying that this shouldn't be counted as a COVID-19 death, I believe, are wrong. I think it should be counted. I think that I don't know how accurate the numbers are. I couldn't say. I don't know what they're, because one thing that is a problem, and in the conspiracy movement, and those people that are awake know that there is a problem with the media lying to us. We cannot trust the media, and they're not including things that they should, and they are saying things that are not true, and there's a lot, they're all fake news. Every single one of them, by the way, including, I just found out, Epoch Times, which, by the way, I don't need to speak against them as much because they are, I know what's happening. I just want to say real quick about the Epoch Times that I looked into them, and basically what it is they are very agenda-based. You can see that. I mean, anybody can see they're highly against the the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. They even named the virus after it, which I don't actually think is really necessarily accurate. But once again, I'm not speaking for the CCP. I'm just saying that, if you're going to say that you're an unbiased news source, not quite. Any news source has a source of funding. And that source has things that they want to say and things that they don't want to say, and most of them have an agenda. I mean, all of them really have an agenda. If they're going to make it, I think that the whole reason the Epoch Times got formed was because the Chinese leader of the Falun Gong movement, he had enough money and power and influence that he created it, along with China Uncensored and a few other channels. But it is clearly their agenda is to get rid of the Chinese Communist Party, which I am not against. Fine. I would rather have the Falun Gong people in charge of China than the Chinese Communist Party, that's for sure. It's just that, when people say that they're an unbiased news source, it's not really true. They should, I mean, and furthermore, also, again, not speaking against them. For instance, China in Focus, by the way, is another one of their channels. You can clearly see, they're always saying they're calling it the Chinese Communist Party virus, CCP virus. And by the way, China in Focus and Epoch Times, and these are, I mean, at least quality sources of news. So, I mean, once again, I don't mean to speak against them per se, but if you understand, now here's my problem with the Epoch Times, and this is why I even investigated them, because, as I mentioned, the information about the Fauci having paid $3.7 million through the NIH, the National Institute of Health, whatever, NIAID was his organization, that they made 4 separate payments, and they have he has 4 separate patents on the coronavirus. They paid the Wuhan lab $3.7 million total to study bat coronaviruses, okay, and that was in 2017, 2018. So, and then all this happened, plus Agenda 201, it all looks kind of suspicious, but the fact of the matter is that if you're going to call it the CCP virus, I would say, I would call it the Fauci, she was a Zhengli, yeah, Xi Zhengli, Gengli, maybe Gengli, whatever. Xi Zhengli, the female Chinese scientist who was making all the discoveries of the bat coronavirus. I would call it the Fauci Zhengli virus, personally. That's what I would call it. And then maybe any others that are more in-depth involved. But I believe that it is in fact a created virus. I think that George Webb, if you look at his channel, George Webb, great source of information about this and great journalist. He was saying that how they made it was not so much like they were splicing in genes. What they did was they took injections from bats, pigs, and other apes for the HIV, and they took those and they kept cross injecting them, and then when the animal gets sick, then they use that and inject it into another animal to build up to where they could make a virus, and this was one of them. And as I said initially, it's still my sense about it, but once again, I have no evidence and no source of information beyond just what I've kind of looked at overall. But it kind of looks to me like they didn't necessarily want for it to get out, but it did, and it might have been the Lord, but I don't know. It might not have been. See, another thing too about this, just because it was created and they had events and stuff like 201 makes it look like they knew it was coming, and the fact that it was created by them doesn't mean it wasn't the Lord and a judgment from the Lord. But it could have also been that he didn't have his hand in it necessarily to create any of that. It was that Satan, through his proxy servants such as Fauci and these other pricks and those Chinese people, they are all doing this for whatever, societal control or their Agenda 21 depopulation event, whatever they're doing. So so it could all be that's going on, but just keep in mind that the Lord has control over all of it. So it's not like he didn't see it coming. It's like a big surprise. The Lord looked down at his laptop and go, "Oh boy, it's like a big surprise," So just keep that in mind. So we don't know anything really at this point, except that the evidence shows, and this is why I had a problem with the Epoch Times, because they did a big report. And by the way, it was a good report, and I'm not speaking against that report, except that if they had information about this very important and very clear and obvious fact that it looks like the Americans, through Fauci and others, were conducting coronavirus experiments and cross-breeding and so forth, that clearly is something that you would want to add into the story. I mean, it didn't take me very long to find that information, but you don't hear the press talking about it, and you don't hear the Epoch Times talking about it. Very suspiciously absent. And by the way, I emailed the guy who's the lead reporter, I forget his name offhand, the guy who's the lead reporter for that documentary, The Source of the Wuhan virus. I emailed him at his Crossroads email. He has another channel on YouTube, Crossroads something or other, I forget. And then, but I emailed him telling him about that. Said, hey, and I showed him the movie that I made with the Dr. Cottrell and the information about Fauci. And but I haven't heard from him yet. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I'm just mentioning it for the record that indeed I did in fact comment that to him about that. But I have a feeling. Here's what it is. They have an agenda to get rid of the CCP, and they're going to keep hammering on the CCP, and they don't want to do anything that will jeopardize that, including bringing up the American connection with Fauci, which, by the way, again, I'm not defending the CCP, and I'm not a 50 Cent Army person, and I'm not saying anything like that. I'm pointing out that they really, in reality, the CCP may not necessarily be to blame for this. They allowed it and they lied about it, but it could. The fact of the matter could be that the Americans, through Fauci, initiated the study, and clearly they paid for it, as the record shows, and that's what the Washington letter. I forget what the name of it is. The Washington, not the Washington Journal, but a fairly significant publication published it, and then other people checked it out, and it's true that Fauci paid a total of $3.7 million to the P4 Wuhan Virology Institute to conduct bat coronavirus research. So in reality, this could be, if they're going to call it the CCP virus, they should maybe call that the Fauci American virus, rather, if he's the one who started it and paid for that research in Wuhan. So but once again, not necessarily, because if for instance, if this leader of the Falun Gong movement, which, by the way, as far as what I know, it's kind of it's a religion, but it's really kind of more of a, like they kind of do yoga exercises, and they have principles of that are actually, I think, good principles as far as what I can see. And if once again, I would much rather have them in charge. But the fact is that they are a threat to the CCP, and so there's, it wasn't like they didn't, they eradicated them for no reason, other than they just wanted control. I mean, I think that movement was becoming so strong and so popular that they did fear that it would topple their government. So it's not like they did what they did for no reason. Which, by the way, the CCP basically just totally made a police security state out of China, almost just to deal with the Falun Gong movement, which basically had to flee to America, where their headquarters is now in New York. And this guy that's leading it, I believe, is the guy who has the money and funding to fund all these YouTube channels to get promotion out there. In any way that people do, that when they have a goal, they want to basically turn the world's opinion against the CCP, which is their primary enemy. And but again, since I don't know a lot about I just started to look into the Falun Gong movement, but and I would rather have them in charge than the Communist Party, because I think at least they would be tolerant to people's religious beliefs, and they would be into peace and Chinese tradition, which I just really feel sorry for the Chinese people. I gotta say that they are suffering because of what the CCP and these irresponsible people in America did, like Fauci, this Dr. Anthony Fauci, who funded bat coronavirus research, and that whole thing of this crossbreeding and everything might have been initiated in America. So that's what I think is a little bit wrong with calling it the CCP virus, because I'm thinking that when you want to ask where the real troublemakers are, guess who? America, okay? If you want to look at all the most evil stuff going on, the most evil stuff with wars and sex trafficking and all this stuff, and you think that, America is the shining beacon of hope and Trump's the good guys and everything. No, Trump's working for them. He's in their back pocket, believe me. Why do you think he has Fauci, the guy who created COVID-19, as the head and the star of his coronavirus task force, okay? It's utterly insane. People who have looked at this, if you listen to George Webb, go to his channel. He's got great information. Listen to Paul Cottrell. These are the real people that know about it, but you will not hear this on the Epoch Times. But again, in the overall scheme of things, I wouldn't be against them. And not only that, but their channels are very good. The channel China in Focus is excellent. China Uncensored is excellent. I mean, you know, and I just wish that they were a little bit more well-rounded in their reporting, but they are agenda-based, and they're obviously throwing a lot of money at it to get these very competent reporters to, you know, do all this stuff, and they, you know, it does put out a lot of interesting and good information. The problem is, once again, it's very agenda-based. It is very biased, and I do have a problem with them saying that it's unbiased reporting. The Epoch Times is unbiased reporting. It's very clearly conservative-leaning, and it's very clearly has an agenda to get rid of the CCP entirely, and they're going to hammer on this whole coronavirus thing, which they should. I mean, that's what I would do. But you know, once again, I just think that they should, you know, they should disclose a little bit more that it's the leader of the Falun Gong movement who is funding them, and you know, be a little bit more forthcoming about all that, and don't be yelling too much that they're an unbiased news source. You know, they're not unbiased, but you know, I'd rather have them than the CCP, that's for sure. So if they win, I'm totally fine with that. But you know, I think that actually they would have more power in their movement if they were honest about what their source is and what their means are. That way people could trust them. Because the fact that I've been hearing or seeing about them all this time, and this was the first now, just now, after, you know, how long I've been hearing about the Epoch Times, I mean, well over 2 years now, this is the first time that I fully realized that they are a Chinese-owned Falun Gong agenda-based organization with several branches leading out. And by the way, also the Epoch Times and the Falun Gong, you know, owned, operated whole movement, owning all those channels and everything, were the #1 supporter of the Trump administration, besides the Trump campaign. And so that's clearly shows, and they were kicked off of Facebook, by the way, for that. And I'm not lauding Facebook for that or anything, but because of that bias, and that they also tried to defeat their means that that Facebook uses to check the information of the source, they were banned from Facebook. So that's actually a viable reason if they were trying to defeat their way that they check for their sources. So I think that what my suggestion would be to the Epoch Times and the Falun Gong movement in general, just be a little bit more forthcoming about your, you know, don't do it. And this is a lesson. I'm not giving you a lecture. I have that problem too. Sometimes I don't talk about what my sources are. I can tend to be a little bit sneaky, you might say. But it's just something that we should remind each other that will actually have more power in what we're trying to do if we'll be forthcoming about what we're doing and what our motivations are.
I remember a lizard man in that office.